The silence in the house was always the first thing she noticed. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but a heavy, expensive one, the kind that comes from thick walls and vast empty spaces. The woman lay in bed, watching the morning light filter through the automated blinds, slicing the room into perfect stripes of light and shadow. The sheets were impossibly soft, a high thread count that felt like a cloud against her skin. Everything in her life was like that, soft, beautiful, and utterly without substance. Her husband was already gone. His side of the bed was cold, a perfect, untouched landscape of designer linen. He left before dawn, a whirlwind of expensive cologne and quiet efficiency. Their parting was a quick peck on the cheek, a murmur about a late-night meeting, a reminder about a charity gala on Friday. It was a script they followed, a play they had been performing for so long that the lines had become second nature. She was the beautiful, supportive wife, and he was the brilliant, powerful man. Together, they were a picture of success, a portrait that hung in the minds of their social circle and business associates. But when the front door clicked shut, the picture was left alone in its frame, and the silence rushed back in to fill the void. She swung her legs out of bed, her bare feet meeting the cool, smooth marble of the bathroom floor. The routine was the same every day. A long shower with water that never ran cold. A coffee machine that produced a perfect latte with the press of a single button. A closet full of clothes she wore once, maybe twice before they were sent to a new home. She chose a simple, cream-colored dress and matching shoes. It was an outfit that said, "effortless elegance," a phrase she had read in a magazine once and had tried to embody ever since. She moved through the sprawling mansion like a ghost, her footsteps making no sound on the plush rugs. The housekeeper, a kind woman with tired eyes, would arrive in an hour to make the beds and polish the silverware until it shone like a mirror. The woman often felt like just another piece of furniture for the housekeeper to maintain, something to be kept clean and displayed in the right light. In the center of the grand living room, where a ceiling so high it seemed to disappear into the shadows, stood the piano. It was a magnificent thing, sleek and black, a Fazioli that cost more than some people's homes. Her husband had bought it for her on a whim, during an auction where he'd been caught up in a bidding war. "Every beautiful home should have a beautiful piano," he had said, clapping his hands together with the excitement of a child who had just gotten a new toy. He didn't play, and neither did she. Not anymore. The piano was a beautiful, silent monument to a life she no longer lived. It was polished daily, its black surface reflecting the room with a perfect, distorted clarity. It was an object of art, as much a part of the decor as the abstract sculpture on the floor or the painting on the wall that cost more than a small island. She avoided it, always giving it a wide berth as she passed through the room. It felt like it was watching her, a silent judge reminding her of the promises she had broken and the person she used to be. She spent her day on the phone organizing a charity luncheon. She spoke to caterers and florists, her voice calm and polite, her requests precise and demanding. She was good at this, at creating beautiful events that looked effortless but were the result of military-level planning. It was a skill she had honed over the years, a way to channel the restless energy that hummed just beneath her perfectly composed surface. She was a master of appearances, of creating a world that looked flawless from the outside. But inside, the cracks were beginning to show. As the afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, she found herself alone in the quiet house once more. The staff had left, and her husband had sent a text message saying he would be working late again. She poured herself a glass of sparkling water and sank into the sofa, the leather cool against her skin. She picked up her phone, the glowing screen a familiar comfort in the encroaching darkness. She scrolled through her social media feed, a curated world of perfect vacations, happy families, and flawless selfies. She saw the lives of her friends, a highlight reel of successes and joys. She liked a few photos, left a polite comment on another, her fingers moving with a practiced ease. It was all so predictable, so safe. And then a video popped up on her feed. It was part of a viral trend. The One Piano Challenge. The premise was simple. someone had to play a notoriously difficult and obscure piece of music called The Phantom's Nocturne and post it online. Most of the videos were of people fumbling through the first few bars, laughing at their own inability to play. But this one was different. A pair of hands, elegant and sure, danced across the keys. The first few notes of the nocturne filled the quiet room, a haunting, melancholic melody that seemed to reach deep inside her. It was a sound she hadn't heard in years, a sound she had tried to forget. A jolt, sharp and unwelcome, shot through her. It was like an electric shock, a sudden, painful memory that surfaced from the depths of her subconscious. Her breath caught in her throat, and her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She quickly closed the app, the phone slipping from her grasp and onto the plush carpet. But it was too late. The ghost of the melody lingered in the air, a phantom presence in the silent room. She looked down at her hands, resting in her lap. They were trembling. Her fingers, usually still and graceful, were twitching with a memory they had long tried to bury. A memory of dusty practice rooms, of a stern-faced teacher, of the weight of 1,000 expectations. A memory of a girl with fire in her eyes and music in her soul, a girl who had once been able to make that piano sing. She stood up, her body moving on its own accord, drawn towards the living room. She stopped a few feet away from the sleek, black instrument, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was filled with the ghost of a melody, a memory of a life she had left behind. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something other than the quiet, heavy emptiness. It was a spark of fear, a spark of longing, a spark of a forgotten passion that threatened to consume her. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was filled, vibrating with a memory of sound that only she could hear. She stood there for a long time, her feet rooted to the marble floor, her gaze locked on the sleek black piano. It felt less like a piece of furniture now and more like a sleeping beast, a powerful creature she had once known but had long since caged. The ghost of that melody, the phantom's nocturne, swirled around her, a whisper from a life she had buried under layers of expensive dresses and polite smiles. A part of her, the part that had been carefully cultivated over a decade, screamed at her to walk away, to go back to her quiet, predictable life, to pour another glass of water and scroll through her phone until the feeling passed. But another part, a smaller, wilder part that had been dormant for years, pushed her forward. It was a feeling she couldn't name, a pull in her chest that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Slowly, as if in a trance, she crossed the remaining distance between her and the piano. Her hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers hovering just above the cool, smooth wood of the lid. She could feel the faint vibration of her own heartbeat in her fingertips. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she lifted the lid. The inside was pristine, the hammers and strings untouched, waiting. She sat down on the bench, the cold leather a shock against her thin dress. It felt strange, unfamiliar. She couldn't remember the last time she had sat at a piano. Her hands hovered over the keys, white and black rectangles stretching out like an unknown landscape. They felt like strangers to her, these hands that now knew only how to hold a wine glass or type a polite text message. Gently, she let her fingers rest on the ivory. A shiver ran through her, a current that seemed to connect her directly to the person she used to be. She pressed down a single key. The note that rang out was clear and pure, cutting through the heavy silence of the room. It was a simple C, but it felt like a gunshot in the stillness. She flinched, expecting someone to come running, to ask her what she was doing. But no one came. The house remained a tomb of silence. She pressed another key, then another, a simple, childlike melody. Her fingers were stiff, clumsy. They felt like they belonged to someone else. The muscle memory was there, but it was buried deep under years of neglect. It was like trying to remember a language she hadn't spoken since she was a child. Frustration pricked at her eyes. This was a mistake. She was a fool. She was about to slam the lid shut when the melody from the video returned to her mind, haunting and beautiful. She closed her eyes, trying to recall the way the hands in the video had moved. She tried to find the first notes of the Phantom's Nocturne. Her fingers fumbled, searching for the right combination of keys. A discordant clang echoed through the room. She winced. It was ugly. It was everything she feared. But then, a flicker of something else. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. She was a little girl again, sitting in a dusty practice room on a worn wooden bench. An old, severe woman with a tight bun stood over her, tapping a ruler on the keys. "Feel the music, don't just play it," the woman's voice echoed in her mind. "It must live inside you." The memory was so vivid she could almost smell the old paper of the sheet music and the lemon polish on the worn wood of that old piano. A wave of nostalgia, so powerful it almost knocked the breath out of her, washed over her. She pushed the memory away, but it left something behind. A spark. That night, she didn't go to bed until the early hours of the morning. She played in secret, her movements at first hesitant and unsure. She was a thief in her own home, stealing these moments of quiet rebellion. The next night, she did the same. She waited until the house was completely still, until the last staff member had left and her husband's text message confirming he'd be out late had arrived. Then she would creep down to the living room like a child sneaking a cookie from the jar, and she would play. The first few nights were a struggle. Her fingers were weak, her mind easily distracted. But slowly, something began to shift. The stiffness in her joints began to ease, and the music started to flow more freely. The Phantom's Nocturne was a difficult piece, full of complex chords and rapid passages that required a dexterity she hadn't used in years. But as she practiced, she felt a change happening within her. It wasn't just her fingers that were remembering. Her soul was remembering, too. The music became an outlet for all the years of unspoken feelings, the quiet desperation, the hidden longing. She poured all of it into the music, her fingers flying across the keys with a newfound urgency. The piano was no longer a silent monument to her past. It was a confidant, a friend. It was the only thing in her life that didn't want anything from her, that didn't expect her to be a certain way. It just wanted her to play. One night she was so lost in the music that she didn't hear the front door open. She was in the middle of a particularly passionate passage, her eyes closed, her body swaying to the rhythm, when a voice cut through the silence. "What are you doing?" Her eyes flew open. Her husband was standing in the doorway of the living room, his briefcase in his hand, a look of confusion on his face. Panic seized her. She slammed the piano lid shut, the sound echoing through the room like a thunderclap. "Nothing," she said, her voice coming out in a squeak. I couldn't sleep. I just thought I don't know." He looked at her, then at the piano, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He had never heard her play. He didn't even know she could. "I didn't know you played," he said, his voice flat. "I don't," she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "Not really. It was just something I used to do. A long time ago." He nodded slowly, his expression still unreadable. "Well, try to keep it down," he said, his tone already shifting back to his usual businesslike demeanor. "I have an early start tomorrow." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the room, her heart pounding against her ribs. The near miss should have scared her off. It should have been the sign she needed to stop, to put the lid back on the piano and on her past for good. But it didn't. It had the opposite effect. It made her more determined. The secret was now more dangerous, and that made it more thrilling. She began to practice with a new intensity, her fingers flying across the keys with a fierce, desperate energy. She was no longer just playing the notes. She was channeling a lifetime of unspoken words into the music. And then, one night, it happened. She played the entire piece from beginning to end, without a single mistake. The final note hung in the air, shimmering and beautiful. And in that moment, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer the beautiful, quiet wife of a millionaire. She was a musician. She was an artist. She was whole. A new idea began to form in her mind, a bold, reckless idea that both terrified and excited her. The one piano challenge. She could post her video anonymously. No one would ever know it was her, but she would know. It would be her secret, her victory. She pulled out her phone, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She propped it up against a vase on the mantelpiece, angled it towards the piano. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was the moment. She raised her hands, and for the first time in over a decade she was ready to let the world hear her play. Her thumb hovered over the screen, a tiny, trembling bridge between her secret and the entire world. The video was ready. A single, flawless take of the Phantom's Nocturne, recorded in the dead of night in the cold, silent living room. The phone was propped up, the angle was perfect, showing only her hands on the keys, the sleeves of her simple dress the only clue to her identity. It was anonymous. It was safe. Or so she told herself. With a deep breath that felt more like a gasp, she pressed the button. Post, the video uploaded, a tiny digital package sent out into the vast, unknowable ocean of the internet. A wave of nausea washed over her. What had she done? She slammed the laptop shut, as if that could somehow pull the video back. She paced the room, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She expected nothing. Maybe a few views from people who stumbled upon it. A polite comment or two? She went to bed, but sleep was a distant country. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the phantom hands on the screen, playing her song. The next morning, she woke up with a sense of dread. She avoided her phone, busying herself with her usual routine, the coffee machine's hiss a familiar comfort. But curiosity was a stronger force than fear. Finally, with trembling fingers, she picked up the phone and opened the app. The video had 50 views. A small knot of disappointment tightened in her stomach. She refreshed the page. 70 views. 100. She put the phone down, telling herself to forget about it. But an hour later, she checked again. 500 views. And there was a comment. Who is this? This is incredible. Another one followed. The emotion in this is just, wow, I'm literally in tears. A strange, unfamiliar feeling bloomed in her chest. It was a mix of terror and a tiny, fragile spark of pride. By that evening, the view count had climbed into the tens of thousands. The video was being shared, not just on the platform where she had posted it, but on others. People were reposting it on their social media feeds, adding their own comments of awe and wonder. The Phantom Pianist. Someone had dubbed her in a tweet, and the name had stuck. The world was having a conversation about her, and she wasn't even in the room. The next day, the video exploded. It was everywhere. It had crossed from the niche corners of the internet into the mainstream. News websites were writing articles about it. The mystery of the Phantom Pianist, a viral sensation. Television morning shows were playing clips of it, with music critics and experts debating the performer's identity and technique. They marveled at the technical skill, the raw emotion, the unique interpretation of the obscure piece. It was the most surreal experience of her life. She would be sitting in a cafe, sipping a latte, and hear people at the next table talking about the mysterious video. She would be watching the evening news with her husband, and see her own hands flash across the screen while the anchor spoke about the global phenomenon. Her husband, oblivious, would make a comment. Huh, another one of these internet fads? He'd say, scrolling through his phone. People have too much time on their hands. She would just nod, her heart pounding, a secret world burning brightly inside her while she played the part of the disinterested wife. She was living a double life, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not for her dress, or her perfect home, or her powerful husband, but for something she had created, something that was purely hers. A secret she had shared with no one was now being debated by millions. But with the fame came the fear. The more popular the video became, the more likely it was that someone from her past would see it. The past, she was learning, was a very patient hunter. And then the hunter struck. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. A washed-up concert pianist, a man who had been her rival in a different lifetime, saw the video. At first, he dismissed it. Just another talented amateur. But something nagged at him. He watched it again, and then a third time. It was in a particularly difficult passage, a series of rapid, intricate notes. There was a unique, unorthodox way of fingering the chords, a technique that was inefficient but produced a sound that was uniquely expressive. It was a technique he and only a handful of other students had been taught by their old, eccentric master. A cold, hard knot of jealousy and recognition formed in his gut. He knew that style. He knew it better than he knew his own name. He spent the next 24 hours in a frenzy of research. He dug through old, digitized archives of music competitions, his fingers flying across his keyboard. He searched through online forums for classical musicians, looking for any mention of the technique. Finally, in a dusty corner of the internet, he found it. A grainy scan of a program from a major youth competition held over 20 years ago, and next to the list of performers was a photo. A younger, unpolished girl with fierce, intense eyes, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. The face was thinner, the expression full of a raw ambition that had long since been erased. But it was unmistakable. It was her. He found another photo, a newspaper clipping from a review of the same competition. The photo was clearer. He took a screenshot of the old photo and a still from the viral video. The resemblance was undeniable. He logged into his social media account, his hands trembling with a mixture of triumph and bitterness. He had spent his entire career in her shadow, and now, finally, he had his moment. He posted the two images side by side with a simple, devastating caption. "The world wants to know who the phantom pianist is. Her name is Ilara Voss, the child prodigy who vanished after the biggest stage fright disaster in a generation. You're welcome." The post went up and the internet broke. The speculation was over. The hunt was over. The secret was out. The woman saw the post while she was in the middle of arranging flowers for a dinner party. Her phone buzzed and she glanced at it, expecting a message from the caterer. Instead, she saw her own face, a face she hadn't seen in over a decade, staring back at her. Next to it was the viral video of her hands. And her real name. Ilara Voss, a name she had buried, a name she had run from. The phone slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the marble floor, the screen shattering into a web of cracks. But it was too late. The image was already burned into her mind. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful. It was deafening. And in the distance she could hear the first faint sounds of the approaching storm. The sound of the phone hitting the marble floor was a sharp, final crack in the perfect, silent world she had built. The screen splintered into a web of tiny, fractured mirrors, each one reflecting a distorted version of her own horrified face. But the image on the screen before it broke was burned into her mind. Her own face, young and fierce, next to the viral video of her hands. And the name. Ilara Voss, a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in over a decade, a name she had packed away in a box and buried in the deepest part of her memory. For a moment she just stood there, frozen. The world outside the windows of her home seemed to hold its breath. Then all at once it exploded. It started with a single notification on her tablet, which was sitting on the kitchen counter. A news alert, then another, and another. Within minutes, her phone, despite its shattered screen, began to ring and buzz incessantly, a frantic, screaming insect on the floor. Unknown numbers? Text messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was inside her house. She peeked through the heavy living room curtains. The quiet, manicured street was now a circus. News vans were parked at odd angles, their satellite dishes pointed at her house like a flock of metal birds. Reporters and cameramen milled about on the lawn. Flashbulbs popped even in the daylight, a constant, blinding strobe. They had found her. The gilded cage had become a glass prison, and she was the exhibit. She backed away from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt trapped, hunted. Every creak of the house, every whistle of the wind, sounded like an intruder. She turned off her phone, but the landline began to ring, its shrill, insistent tone cutting through the air. She unplugged it from the wall. The silence that returned was even more terrifying, filled with the unspoken questions of the world outside. She didn't know how long she sat there, in the middle of the floor, curled into a ball. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours. She was lost in a fog of panic, replaying the disastrous moment from her past over and over in her mind. The front door opened, and she flinched. It was her husband. He walked in, his face tired from a long day at the office, but his expression quickly changed to one of confusion as he took in the scene. The unplugged phone, her huddled form on the floor, the strange, heavy silence. "What's going on?" he asked, putting his briefcase down. "The phone lines are swamped. My assistant said she's been trying to reach you for hours." "Something about a video?" He didn't know. He hadn't seen. For a fleeting second, she thought about lying, about making up some story about a PR crisis at his company. But the look on his face, the genuine concern mixed with annoyance, broke her. The lie was too big, too heavy to carry anymore. Slowly, she uncurled herself and stood up. She walked over to the tablet on the kitchen counter, her hands shaking so badly she could barely type. She pulled up the post, the one that had started it all, the side-by-side images of Alara and the phantom pianist. She held it out to him, unable to meet his gaze. He took the tablet, his brow furrowed. He was quiet for a long time as he read the words as he stared at the images. She watched his face, looking for some sign of anger, of disgust. But there was none. His expression just went blank. All the life, all the energy, seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. He finally looked up from the screen, his eyes not angry, but filled with a deep, wounded confusion. He looked at her as if he were seeing a complete stranger standing in his kitchen. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. He held up the tablet. "Who did I marry?" And just like that, the dam broke. 10 years of carefully constructed silence came pouring out of her in a torrent of words. She told him everything. She told him about Alara, the girl who was born to play the piano. She described a childhood that wasn't a childhood at all, but a rigorous, unforgiving schedule. Practice rooms that smelled of old wood and desperation. A mother's sharp voice correcting a single note for an hour. A father's disappointed silence when she won second place instead of first. She was their project, their investment, their ticket to a world they could only dream of. She told him about the pressure, the immense, crushing weight of being a prodigy. The constant fear of not being good enough, of disappointing everyone. She spoke of the final competition, the one that was supposed to launch her into stardom. It was televised, a major event in the classical music world. The pressure was immense. She walked out onto the stage, the lights blinding, the audience a sea of shadowy faces. She sat at the piano, her hands sweating, her heart a frantic drum. She placed her fingers on the keys, and her mind went completely blank. A terrifying, empty void where the music should have been. She just sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence in the concert hall growing louder and louder with each passing second. Then she had done the only thing she could do. She had run. She fled the stage in tears, the sound of 1,000 disappointed sighs chasing her out into the night. The humiliation was absolute, a public failure broadcast for the world to see. "So I ran," she said, her voice cracking with the memory. "I changed my name. I cut off my hair. I moved to a new city and decided to become the most boring, normal person I could be. Someone who would never, ever be put in a position to fail like that again. I met you, and you were kind, and your world was so safe and predictable. I thought if I just played the part long enough, I could forget about Alara. I could just be your wife." He listened to the entire story without saying a word. When she was finished, the silence in the room was deafening. He finally put the tablet down on the counter, the screen still glowing with her ghost face. He didn't look at her. He just looked at the floor. I need some time," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I'm going to stay at the apartment in the city." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen. A few minutes later, she heard the front door close, and the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway, past the news vans, and disappearing down the street. He was gone? And she was alone. The perfect life was shattered. The secret was exposed. And the woman who had been two different people for so long was suddenly no one at all. The silence that followed the closing of the front door was different from any silence she had known before. It wasn't the heavy, expensive silence of a perfectly kept house, nor the tense, secret silence of her late-night practices. This was a hollow, echoing silence, the sound of a life emptied out. For the first 2 days, she didn't leave the house. She didn't answer the persistent ringing of the phone, nor did she look at the thousands of emails and messages flooding her inbox. She just existed, moving through the vast rooms like a ghost, a stranger in her own home. The news vans remained a permanent fixture on the street, their cameras like hungry eyes, always watching. She closed the heavy curtains, shutting out the world and the sunlight, plunging herself into a self-imposed twilight. The piano in the living room was covered again, its black shape a looming shadow in the dim light. She couldn't look at it. It was the source of her ruin, the key that had unlocked a past she had desperately tried to lock away. She felt a profound resentment towards it, not just for exposing her, but for reminding her of the girl she used to be, the girl who had been so weak, so easily broken. On the third day, a sense of anger began to bubble up from beneath the layers of despair. She was watching a morning news show on the television. They were discussing her, of course. A panel of experts, a psychologist, a music critic, and a former celebrity agent were dissecting her life, her motivations, her breakdown. They used words like pathological, deceitful, and attention-seeking. They painted her as a manipulative woman who had orchestrated the whole thing for fame. They didn't know her. They didn't know the fear, the pressure, the crushing weight of expectations. They didn't know the quiet desperation of living a life that wasn't her own. A fire lit inside her. It was a small, flickering flame at first, but it grew with every condescending word the pundit spoke. She was not going to let them write her story. She was not going to be a character in their drama. She picked up the phone and, ignoring the hundreds of missed calls, dialed a number she found online. It was the number for a journalist, a woman known for her thoughtful, in-depth profiles, not for sensationalism. To her surprise, the journalist answered personally. "I want to tell my story," the woman said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not the phantom pianist's story. Not L.R. Voss's story, mine." A week later, she sat in a simple chair in a sterile studio, facing a single camera. There was no live audience, no panel of experts. Just her, the journalist, and the quiet hum of the equipment. She was nervous, her hands clammy, but she was also determined. When the journalist asked her why she did it, why she posted the video, she took a deep breath and began to speak. She didn't use big words or complex sentences. She just spoke from the heart. "When you're a child and you're good at something, people don't see you," she said, her voice steady. "They see the thing you do. I wasn't a little girl who loved to play piano. I was a prodigy. I wasn't a daughter who wanted to make her parents proud. I was an investment. For my whole life I was a what, not a who." She spoke about the pressure, not with anger, but with a sad honesty. It's like being asked to carry a glass of water across a desert. Everyone is watching you, telling you not to spill a single drop. And all you can think about is the water, how heavy it is, how much you want to drink it, but you can't. You just have to carry it. And the longer you walk, the more your hand shakes, and the more certain you are that you're going to drop it. She described the day of the competition, the day she ran. It wasn't just that I forgot the music. It was like my whole mind just emptied. The pressure was so great that something inside me just broke. And running off that stage was the most terrifying and the most liberating moment of my life. I was free, but I was also a failure. She explained why she lied, why she became the quiet, perfect wife. I was so tired of being looked at, of being judged. I just wanted to be invisible. I wanted to build a life so safe, so normal, that I would never have to feel that kind of fear again. The man I married, he's a good man. He offered me a world where I didn't have to be anything special. And I took it because I was so tired of being special. The interview was broadcast a few days later. Her husband watched it from his sterile, minimalist apartment in the city. He saw the woman he thought he knew, but he was seeing her for the first time. He saw the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability in her voice. He understood that the lie wasn't a betrayal of him, but a desperate act of self-preservation. He saw the little girl carrying the glass of water, and his heart ached for her. He got in his car and drove home. The news vans were still there, but he didn't see them. He only saw the house and the woman inside. He found her not by the piano, but by the large window in the living room, watching the sunset. The curtains were open. The room was filled with a warm, golden light. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, and she turned to look at him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a decade of silence and unspoken truth passed between them. "I saw the interview," he said, his voice quiet. She just nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't understand." "I'm sorry too," she whispered. They didn't talk about forgiveness or the future. They just stood there together, watching the last sliver of the sun disappear below the horizon. It was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. The media frenzy died down, replaced by a quiet respect for the woman who had bared her soul. She didn't go back to being the quiet wife, nor did she return to the concert stage. Instead, she found a new purpose. She started volunteering at a local community center, teaching piano to children. The room was small and bright, a stark contrast to the cold, grand living room of her mansion. She taught them not with the pressure of perfection, but with the joy of creation. She showed them how to feel the music, how to make the piano sing, not just with their fingers, but with their hearts. The Fazioli in the living room was played often now, but the music that filled the house was different. It was lighter, freer, filled with a newfound peace. It was the sound of a woman who had finally stopped running from her past and had learned to compose her own future. She was no longer the millionaire's wife, nor the fallen prodigy. She was simply herself, and for the first time in her life, that was more than enough.